Hello, and welcome back to the Elevate Your Running podcast. My name is Coach Sarah Manderscheid, and I'm here today with an awesome human. We have RuthAnn Lobos here with us today, and she's a veterinarian, and we're going to talk all about how to safely run with your pets and specifically your dogs. And I think RuthAnn and I both are dog lovers. We both are runners. We both I think run with our dogs. Kenzie, if you're familiar with my black lab, Kenzie, she's turning 9 this spring, and we might run like a quarter mile to a 1K some days, but she loves her outdoor walks. So I think this episode's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be really educational, and hopefully, if you're a dog owner and you run with your dog, or you own a dog and you're thinking about taking your dog out for a run, that this is going to be a really enlightening episode, because I have a feeling that we're going to learn some things that we didn't know at all about how to take care of our dogs when we head out there for our runs. So welcome to the podcast, Ruth Ann.
Hi, thanks. And right on cue. One of my dogs started barking, and then we are dog sitting currently for a friend's dog. So they are very excited about the episode about them as well.
Yeah, it's like perfect timing. Before we started recording this, I'm like, if all of our dogs just start like, pronouncing or making themselves known in the background, that's just going to make this episode so much more, I think, holistic in its
Yeah,
own way.
right.
Well, for our audience, could you give a quick background on who you are, what you like to do outside of your day-to-day job, but also like what you do with dogs and pets and animals?
Yeah. So veterinarian based here in Boulder, Colorado. I grew up in Louisiana, graduated from LSU, and then kind of stepstoned my way over to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains with about a 15-year stop in Austin, Texas, and then came out this way about 7 years ago. And I work full time for Purina as a veterinarian for them. But then I'm also certified in canine rehab as well as acupuncture, and have a little side hustle here in the Boulder area, and do relief work in and around. So kind of like that substitute veterinary work at a clinic a couple of days a month, just to kind of keep my hand in being what I like to call a real veterinarian. So I do a lot of speaking and public relations for Purina about nutrition for your dogs, particularly in the sporting dog sport world. I have actually, I was about to say 9, but he just turned 10-year-old human. And then I also have a 10-year-old yellow Labrador Finn and a 1-year-old wire-haired pointing Griffon puppy named Journey. And so we do a fair amount of upland game hunting. So really focusing again kind of on that athletic dog, and really how we make sure we take care of them, not only from a nutrition standpoint, but then also just an overall holistic body standpoint as well. And so I really feel fortunate that I get to put a lot of my passions around athleticism and dogs and the sporting world to life through my profession. And I'm also a runner myself. So I started running marathons. I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my 20-year anniversary of running marathons. So I ran my first one in Austin in 2005. Since then, I've run Boston a handful of times. I've run New York a couple of times. That's on my calendar again this year. And all along the way, I feel like I've also been fortunate that my dogs have also been my running buddies. And so really, again, focusing on making sure I'm taking care of them so that they can be supportive of me in my running career and passion as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so awesome. And I think of all the recovery side to running as a human. And I have to think like our best pals, our pace pals also need some of that too. So I can't wait to kind of dive in to this episode. And yeah, good luck at New York. That's going to be exciting this fall.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. It's such a great course. I haven't run it, but like the vibes always seem just 10 out of 10 from all the videos on online, social media, friends and athletes that have run that course. And we're recording on a day where I think the New York City Marathon is announcing their lottery selections, which is an
Yeah.
exciting day too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I will say, hands down, it is my favorite race. Having run a lot of the big ones, there, like you said, there is nothing like the crowd that comes out for New York. I mean, it is, I feel like there were times in like mile like 11 to 16 where I don't feel like my feet even hit the ground because the roar of the crowd was so loud that it just like carried me down the road. It was, yeah, it's just insane.
That is awesome. I think that's what maybe we all want in a marathon, like enough crowd support to make you feel like you're flying down the road and you're not having to work as hard. I know I had that experience at Chicago a few years ago. I get to go back to Chicago this fall. And I hope we were both talking about how we hope we kind of have this like awesome experience in our fall majors because both these races are really important to us. We love the marathon distance. And it's just really fun to be running through the streets of those cities and feeling supported by everyone too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I want to get into our episode today and kind of give like more of foundation before we get into the more details of taking your dog out for a training run and all the things that kind of come with it. But like my first question is like what are maybe the best breeds that are most suitable for running?
Yeah. So I would say any breed can be your running buddy, but certainly there are just from a like physical structure standpoint, a history of genetics standpoint, there
Mm.
are, certain breeds that stick out. In my life, I've had dogs of all shapes and sizes, everything from a little French bulldog to a poodle mixed dog. Upwards of, I've had, several Labradors as well. And Drake, who was my previous Labrador, he was a really tall guy. And he sometimes would get confused for like a Great Dane Lab mix because he was so tall. And I found both from a professional standpoint as well as a personal just experience standpoint that it's kind of like that 45-ish to 50-pound dog size. Typically, well, now, I will throw out the caveat that they are a healthy 45 to 50 pounds, not a should be 30-pound dog that weighs 45 pounds. But that sort of medium size really is kind of like that sweet spot where they are big enough from an endurance standpoint with us that they're not having to take 17 million steps to our one stride like the smaller breed dogs are, but they're not so large like a Great Dane or a Newfoundland or something like that, where it is such force that is put on their bones and their joints. But I think one of the kind of two key things with that is one, and I know as I am a relatively new puppy owner again, I mean, she's a year now, but she's still in that actively growing stage of when we get a new puppy, and especially as runners ourselves, and we're like, oh, I want that running buddy, and I want him to like start off right away. And it is so key that just like on the human side, where we see, that those repetitive force injuries that happen, whether that's, a baseball player who is super young and he's pitching, 90 to 100 pitches every single day, he's going to have, elbow and shoulder injuries and things like that. The same is for our puppies as they're developing. We really want to make sure that they are full grown before we take them on, runs that are 1 to 2 to 5 miles long. And because again, that repetitive force can really impact their bones and their joints as they grow. And then the second piece to kind of what breeds is really more about their body condition. So I kind of alluded to it earlier, but when keeping them in lean ideal body condition, which means you can feel their ribs, you can see their waistline when you look at them from above, and you can tell that they have a little abdominal tuck there, and so they're in ideal body condition. That is also so key to making sure that they are in proper shape to run with us, because there are breeds like the German short hair pointer, the Vizslas, the border collies that are really built and designed for endurance. But if they are not fully developed from a skeletal standpoint, and they are not in ideal body condition, that's going to be a huge drag on their ability to stay with us as our running buddies for as long as possible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting and something that maybe we might not think of. Like, I got my dog Kenzie as a puppy, and I remember like wanting to run with her right away. I mean, she was a ball of energy, as all puppies are.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'm going to take her, you know, on a short little run or whatever and get out some of that energy. What constitutes as like a full grown animal, or is each breed, I guess maybe a better question would be like, does each breed have a different amount of time where they're able to be considered full grown? And what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so I would say the larger the kind of adult size of the dog, the longer their growing period is. So most of the time, like our smaller breed dogs, so anywhere, 25 pounds or below, they typically will reach, full grown size anywhere between about 9 and 12 months of age. And then our larger breed dogs can take anywhere from, a year to, the giant breeds like those Newfies and those St. Bernards and all of that can oftentimes go up to 2 years before their bones have stopped growing, and they're like all their muscles and hormones and all of that are finally kind of in that mature state. And it's a balance, right? Like our puppies are, like you said, they are just like they've got all of this energy, and it's like, oh my God, we have to do something with this so they don't eat the baseboards and chew my tennis shoes and, as I like to say, make bad choices.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of ways, and I'm in full support of like getting them outside and getting them that exercise. But a lot of it is like when they are running by our side, they are subjected to our pace. And so when they can run like off leash, and as long as they have that recall training and that obedience training that's there, but letting them, we are so fortunate here in Boulder, right, to have all these like dog friendly off leash trails and all of that, which I love for, especially for our puppies when they're fully vaccinated, to be able to get out there and, have those little sniff walks and things like that and run. And, if you've been on walks and runs with Kenzie, where it's like, when they're off leash, they'll sprint for a little bit and then they stop and they mill around, and it's like they're running their own fartlicks while while they are out there,
Totally.
which I love for our puppies. Again, like a trail is a softer surface than concrete or asphalt, and then they're kind of stopping and starting and still getting their exercise. So it's really when we want them to consistently run by our side for those, 3, 5, 7, 10, 12 miles with us, that I really want to make sure that we wait until their bones are done growing.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's a lot longer than I think I realized the dogs
Yeah.
needed. Yeah, because it's like, you know, at 6 months or at a year, they're base, at least for a lab, full grown or at least in the height area, you know.
Yeah.
And it feels like the right time to take them out or to start running with them, but maybe it's still a bit too early. Do you recommend that dog owners, you know, have a discussion with their local vet before they take out their dogs, or what's kind of your recommendation there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're their veterinarian. I say this a lot to folks because you should have a really great, trusting relationship with your veterinarian. And if
Yeah.
you can't have that open dialogue, and a lot of time I get what's called like the pimp the vet questions from friends and colleagues and family members who are like, my vet said this, and I don't know if I trust them. And like, my first response to them every time, hands down, is like, if you don't trust your veterinarian, you need to find a new veterinarian, because you as an owner are your dog's best advocate. We as veterinarians get to see them in really small, tiny snapshots of time. And if you can't have a, full on honest discussion and really feel like you're having good two-way dialogue with your veterinarian, then you need to find a new one. And they're like, and it's not a knock on that veterinarian, but different people jive with different people.
Yeah.
And, it's like that's just the way life is. And so if you're not clicking with your vet, I strongly recommend to find a new one and do some interviews until you find somebody that you feel comfortable with. Yeah, so absolutely, like having that conversation of like, hey, we're bringing this new dog into our family. When do you think is a good time to start running? You know, telling them that you're a runner, your distances that you like and things like that, can just help your veterinarian to better understand, okay, what are your goals for your dog and for yourself, and how can we best meet those, keeping the health and well-being of that dog first and foremost.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to say, or at least in my experience, of, "Oh, I have 5 miles on the calendar, so Kenzie's coming with me for 5 miles." But she might not be ready for that. And that might be way too much for her, depending on the week, the activity, the movement, and also the age and how long she had been running previous to that. What do you feel like? Is there like a certain way to go about introducing running with your dog? Is it similar to how we are as humans, where we start to build slowly and each week we just kind of build a little bit more and more?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's like, so there are a lot of similarities with us and dogs. Both our brains and our digestive tract, and they're omnivores and we're omnivores and all of that. But and so it is. So from a training standpoint, I mean, their aerobic endurance and things like that progress very similarly to ours. I will say most of the time, even for those speedy humans out there, running a 7-minute mile over and over and over again for a lot of these dogs that are built for endurance, like the Vizsla or, the German short hair pointer and things like that, is like for humans running like 11-minute miles. Like their endurance and their VO2 maxes are about, when we look at how a dog's VO2 max, who is in prime endurance condition, compares to some of those professional marathoners, it's about 2 to 3 times their VO2 max. So I mean, they could dust us like without even batting an eye, right? But they do have to build up to that. And there's also important things to keep in mind, like they don't sweat. For them to offload heat, they pant. And so that's one of the things, like when I'm speaking about really, looking for signs of heat stroke or heat exhaustion, or just kind of a rise in temperature in our dogs, especially as we start to get into the warmer months. I love to use their tongue as kind of a temperature gauge. So their tongue will, because they pant to reduce their body temperature, their tongue will get longer and wider as they get hotter and hotter. And then when they get really hot, their tongue will start to kind of curl up and almost fan out. And they're trying to kind of increase the surface area to get more heat off. So that's one of the things that I talk to people a lot about. I'm like, look at your dog's tongue. If it is like out and they're panting hard and it's curled up, then we need to get cooled down really quickly. So, or not really quickly, but we need to get in a cool spot quickly to get their temperature down. So those are kind of a little bit of things to watch for when we're kind of starting to build that endurance. But yeah, it's similar as far as like, okay, we're going to have a 10% increase in activity, right? Over week. But it's also important to keep in mind like the other things that they're doing outside of running with us. So if you're taking them to doggy daycare, like that's, is an endurance sport in itself for our
Yeah.
dogs and can be exhausting. Or if you're going hiking with your friend and you take your dog and they're running around off leash, sometimes they can put on 3 to 5 times as many miles as we do. So if you're doing Sanitas, they might put on, 8, 9 miles while we're only hiking, 3.5 or so. So those are all things for us as their owners to keep in mind when we are considering bringing them along on our running journey.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. I think back to a few years ago, I was playing with Kenzie at a park at Crested Butte, and my brother in law and sister were there. And my brother in law was like, "How far do you think Kenzie's actually running right now? Like, how far do you think the ball is going?" And okay, so he was trying to like factor in the mileage based on like the throw, and she was running to catch the ball and come back to us. And I think that that's so important as owners is to realize if you are taking your dog off leash, that they are doing quite a bit more running and movement than we may think. And I know there are maybe there's something out there for dogs like a maybe a step tracker or like a location tracker or something like that to kind of keep tabs on them. I would
Yeah.
love to have that for Kenzie.
I know. Yeah. So there are several companies like Garmin makes one for dogs. Like I run with a Garmin and they have those for dogs as well. But yeah, there's a number of different brands out there to measure. Like some of my friends who do different kinds of upland game hunting, like their dogs on any given day will run upwards of 30 miles.
Yeah.
And they can try, and it's just like, oh, and they'll do it multiple days in a row. Now they've trained up for that. So they have that endurance, background and built into them. But it is really amazing just that ability of these dogs to just go and go.
Yeah, I mean, it's nonstop. So, what I think I'm hearing you say is I need to start coaching or writing dog training plans, and we need to get Kenzie a Garmin.
There you go.
Her
Yes.
birthday's coming up. And you had mentioned this earlier on in the episode about soft surface over other types of surfaces when we're taking our dogs out for runs. One of the reasons I moved to Boulder and have loved living in Boulder is the off leash and the soft
Yeah.
surfaces for Kenzie and how much better of a life and experience that she gets over living in a city or like, downtown Denver, for example. Absolutely nothing wrong with Denver, but just it's different for dogs. What would you recommend in terms of taking our dogs out? If we get the chance to run on soft surface, would that be your primary recommendation over asphalt, road, cement, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about kind of what they're used to. So I will also
Mhm.
use Finn, my yellow, as an example where we have been doing just because there's been a lot of ice and snow and things like that. So we have been doing a lot of running on the roads or bike paths because. As you know, here in Boulder, those are the first things to get cleared
Yeah.
during a snowstorm, after a snowstorm, more than the roads. And so he's been really used to running a lot on the concrete and the asphalt. And just last Sunday, we were running the back roads, leaving from Tom Watson and running the back roads. And his paws actually, I got sore. And it was because there was still, just a little bit of moisture that was there. So it was kind of like running, on really rough gravel for him. And it was something that his pads usually we mix that in at least once a week and we just hadn't been doing that. So it was one of those where it was a moment for me and I was like, buddy, and he's not going to tell me that his paws hurt because that's his jam is to go run with me and my lady friends.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of those where I was like, oh, that's right. Like that was a big jump for him to go and run 13 after having been running, 8 to 10 on roads. That 13 on the kind of dirt and gravel was a bit much for him. And so I think that, again, it's just something to keep in mind as far as like what they are used to, because their pads will get super thick and they are pretty resilient during the summertime, kind of going back to things to think about as the temperature goes up is, if you put your hand on the asphalt or on the concrete and you can't hold it there for more than 3 seconds, it's too hot for your dog's paws. And so that's again where we are so lucky here in Boulder to have those soft surfaces, have the shaded trails. So that way, because the dirt doesn't get as hot as the concrete and asphalt does. On the flip side of that, when there is ice and snow out there, Finn, he doesn't seem to mind. Ernie, my Griff, is a little bit more sensitive with her paws, and I don't know if it's just their specific, unique differences or if it's a breed thing. But so thinking about, getting your dog used to having booties on, especially if you're going to be doing things on, really, rocky or icy surfaces, and getting them used to, those boots as a younger dog can be helpful long term if you're going to, again, be venturing out when there's ice and snow and things like that.
Yeah, and would you recommend the booties too for like a warmer day when the pavement is too hot, or would you just recommend not taking the dog out at all?
Lean towards either taking them out early morning or late
Yeah.
evening instead of the boots, because that is the one place that our dogs sweat is actually through their pads. So it's a high area of heat exchange for them. So if that is covered in a boot and it's hot out, that could just increase their body temperature faster than we would really want them to. So in those situations, I'd rather go out super early or, way after the sun goes down, or stick to those trails and those shaded surfaces.
Yeah, and that's so smart. I mean, in the summertime, if I am taking Kenzie out outside of early morning, or we love our after dinner walks, but as the
Yes.
summer goes on and on, it's like we start them later and later because she is a black lab, and just the nature of like her color, she's a solar panel, right? Like she
Yeah.
just absorbs all that sun. So if we do end up going out, outside of the extreme of early morning, late night, it's usually to go swimming and for her to
Yeah.
cool off and to have fun with that. But it's really something to consider because they are just carrying so much more fur and they're just so much warmer, or at least some breeds are. Um, so as we, think about going through training and adding in some mileage with our dogs and kind of, following that 10% rule, is there a certain type of training required to take your dog out? And I know this could be maybe subjective if you want to talk about on and off leash running. Is there anything that we could practice before going out with our dog to make sure that, they're ready to either be right next to our side or have that flexibility of being off leash and that recall?
Yeah. Yeah. So, certainly, I mean, obviously, we have the requirements from the county to get their off leash tag. And really, I think
Hmm.
that's more educating us than
Oh,
anything else,
100%
us
it
as
is.
humans. But so, so I think about really kind of going in these like small bites. And that could be, jogging around the block. And I did a post recently about this, about like the love languages of our pets. And some of them, like, some of them, their favorite thing in the world is treats, or their favorite thing in the world is their tennis ball. Or their favorite thing in the world is actually just pets and time with you. And so, if you can kind of understand what your dog's love language is, for Finn, I feel like it's all of the above. It's like activity and pets and my tennis ball and treats all
Yeah.
together. Can I have it all at one time? But really trying to, hone in on that. And so that way, when you're testing and kind of learning, okay, is running with my dog going to be something that we both enjoy? To use that love language as a positive reinforcement when you're out there. And even if it's just one time around the block, and let's see how this goes. We will probably start venturing into that world myself, as Journey is now a year. And so in the next few months, she's going to start to probably come into the rotation of running with Finn and me. And so it'll be something where I'm like, does she enjoy this? And taking along, treats, or if the tennis ball is their favorite thing, taking along the tennis ball and having an opportunity to stop and make sure you're fulfilling their love language while they're fulfilling your love language. And then from the off leash standpoint, I think it is just so critical that they have, just impeccable recall. And again, going back to that love language, carrying something with you that they will come back to. So for Finn, I know, as much as he loves his tennis ball and he loves me and he loves activity, really treats are his true love language. And hilariously, carbohydrates are his thing. This was probably, I think this was like 2 years ago. I was training for Boston at the time, and we met at Tom Watson Park. And as we were leaving, there was like this half of a sandwich that I don't even know how long, don't want to know how long it had been sitting there, but he like lunges for it. So I pull him away and we go on, and we had like an 18 or 20 mile training run that day. So it's been, more than 2.5 hours. We come back, and as I'm coming back into the parking lot, he is like hard 90-degree turn going back to that sandwich that is
Yeah.
there. Like he is waiting for that crust. So when we're out, on an off-leash trail, I always make sure I have treats with me because I know like that will get him back to me. So I think that is really critical when you're taking your dog running, and whether they've been your running buddy for, 2 weeks or, 5 years, making sure that you have something that you can get them back to you is going to set everybody up for success.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And I found success with when Kenzie is off leash, like having treats, recalling her with treats. Anytime I say the word treats, she's sleeping next to me right now. She's not moving. Or I have like a little bag and I start to shake it.
Right?
Her head perks up. She's looking at me and it's like sprint to mom. I got to get the treats.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
great. It's great.
exactly. Yeah, it's amazing that little shake sound is like somehow hardwired right into their little brains and hearts and stomachs.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just the best. But knowing you kind of have that extra pull, because your voice isn't always going to get them back to you, especially
Right.
if they're into something really good. Like, Teller Farms, there's a lot, this is a trail in Boulder, there's a lot of interesting things that the dogs
Yes.
can find their way into. And knowing that you have something to bring them back to you always feels good.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and like with that, we could talk a little bit about fueling, and fueling your dogs. Like I would think it's natural that we would want to feed them more if they're running with us, but can you kind of speak more to that and kind of how that works?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of kind of cool things. Well, maybe me and my nerdiness think that it's cool. So, like when we're training for distance and endurance, like I don't know if you do, but I will like do some carb loading, especially when, the miles get up to 20, 22, things like that. Making sure that we have, that those carbs in our system stored away for endurance. But unlike us, our dogs actually use fat for endurance. So that is their primary fuel. So when we're looking at really kind of honing into their hardwired metabolism, making sure that, they have a solid fat source in their diet. So Finn eats, it's a food by ProPlan called Sport 30/20. So it's 30% protein, 20% fat, which is a little bit higher than your average kind of maintenance dog food that's out there. And again, he's doing a lot of endurance miles, whether it's with me when we're training and running or when we're doing some upland game hunting and he's out there running in the prairies. He needs that fat to really have that extra kick and tap into his true VO2 max. But it's really, for them, they don't burn nearly as many calories as we think that they do. So if they
Mm,
go, like oftentimes, like if we go on, a 30 to 45-minute walk, maybe that's, 2.5 miles. For Finn, who weighs, about 75 pounds in an ideal body condition, he's burning about 150 calories. So not really a whole lot. Like that's
yeah.
maybe a third a cup of dog food. They still do have kind of how we afterwards, like after a workout or a hard run or something, we're wanting to make sure we get protein into our bodies for recovery. And they have that same kind of 30 to 45-minute window where they are like ready to absorb all those nutrients afterwards. So having a small snack if they are going on more, an hour or longer run with us, is still recommended for, when they get back, but it's pretty small. So like literally maybe a quarter cup of food is really all that they need from a recovery standpoint.
Oh my gosh, so that's so cool, and I haven't really thought about that. Like, Kenzie doesn't run long distance with me, but it does kind of make sense. I mean, anytime we go out for a walk, she does when she comes home, she walks immediately to the treat drawer, but that could also be a different thing. Labs love food. It is
Yes.
definitely the best way to train them with treats and all the goodies.
Yes. And in their defense, so they did just recently, there was a study that was published just recently that some Labradors are actually missing the gene that tells them that they're full. So they
Yeah,
literally do think that they're hungry all the time. That does not mean that we as humans need to feed them all the time.
right.
But it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, it's not their fault. They really maybe do think that they're hungry, and so that's why they are asking. But we have to make sure that we keep them nice and lean, because we also know good research that Purina actually did that showed if we keep them in lean body condition, they lived almost 2 years longer than their paired litter mates did, and they had less arthritis and diabetes and things like that that really decrease their quality of life. So I'm like, not only did they have a longer lifespan, but they had a longer health span as well. And all that, the only difference was they were just fed to a lean body condition. So I'm like, it's so easy.
It can be, and it's something that I've heard my veterinarian say to me every single year as Kenzie has her annual checkup of like, great job keeping her on the leaner side. I obviously want her to live forever, that's not
Right?
possible, but as long as possible. And I think all dog owners want that for their extension of their family or part of their family. Like keep the dogs living and alive and healthy and happy for as long as possible. Um, well, I would love to chat about once we get into a run, maybe what are some of the best gear items? Like we could talk about collars, harnesses, reflective gear. You've already mentioned dog boots, but is there anything specific that you're like, this is really great gear if you're taking your dogs out for a run?
Yeah. Well, one for sure are poop bags. We have to be
Yeah.
responsible pet owners out there.
Yeah.
So making sure you have that. One of the things that I love, so we do, I'm a mom and I have a full-time job. So a lot of times I'm meeting my group of friends at dark 30. Sometimes, it's 5 a.m., 5:15, we're starting our runs to get that in. And so I don't get any kickbacks from this, but we have it's a rechargeable glow in the dark collar for Finn. Like I got mine off of Amazon, but it just looks like a little neon light that goes around his neck. And I've gotten more compliments and more and comments about that just because it adds, oftentimes again, we're running on the street. And so I might have my blinky light on, but they might not see him. So they have, I've gotten a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, like that is brilliant. Or if you have to run, after work and in the winter it's dark after work, having that little light up collar around his neck has gotten a lot of really great positive feedback. And also, having, you mentioned reflective gear. So they make leashes that have, that same reflectiveness that's on the backs of our running shoes and things like that.
Yeah.
I think is huge. I'm not, again, it depends on how, if ideally, and this is going to be a shout out to my dog trainer friend Lauren, who, talks about getting them to run when they're on lead with a loose leash, so they're not pulling you.
Yeah.
I know that is oftentimes easier said than done, but if you can get them by your side, but if you can't, exploring things like harnesses that really pull more from their mid back instead of pulling and pulling on their airway and their neck and things like that. I'm not a big fan, and this may be controversial, but I'm not a big fan of the gentle leaders that go around their necks. Or go around their muzzles, especially for running, because that oftentimes will pull their head in a really abnormal position and they wind up more with, neck and shoulder dysfunction later in life because of that like odd running gait that they have to have.
Yeah, and that's something that we probably don't think about either, especially, yeah, whether it's the mask, over the muzzle or the harness. and where the harness is placed. So those are all really good tips to just double check what you're using for your dogs. And if they need an upgrade, maybe their birthday's coming up and they get the Garmin with a new harness. Who knows?
That's right.
I love it. We talked a little bit about what to do in the summer or that warm temperature. We feel the pavement. We take our dogs out early morning, late evening, try to avoid that like really warm weather or that peaking sun because we want to keep them safe and they can get warm really quickly, at least in my experience with Kenzie. If most of the country is coming out of a deep freeze, it doesn't mean that we're past that cold weather. I mean, I hope we are, but I also saw today, like in Minnesota, there was like this huge snowstorm outside of Minneapolis, like huge, and they've just had spring. So, is there something that we like when it comes to like winter, snow, ice? What should we avoid? What kind of temperature should we avoid when taking our dogs out?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And certainly, they get acclimated to whether it's the super cold or the super hot. They will get acclimated to that just like we do, where I know sometimes like as we're hitting that fall and we get that first like 30-degree snap and it's like, oh my God, I'm dying of of frostbite. And now it's like, oh, 30 degrees, like that's actually kind of warm. And so their bodies will adjust, similarly to that. But really, there's things to take in mind that keep in mind is that when there's precipitation, so whether that's sleet, snow, rain, any kind of moisture like that on their coat, it's great when they're hot, but it can be detrimental when they're cold. So it's going to have them get a lot colder a lot faster. Put it in kind of human terms, like when it's cold outside, the last thing you want to do is take a wet blanket and wrap it around you and think that you're going to get warm. That's just going to accelerate your heat loss. When there's that kind of precipitation, also wind, just like when we're out there, and the wind chill factor is real for us and it's real for them as well. Um, that's where, when you're thinking about going out and there is ice and snow, that's where, those booties can certainly come in and help out. If you're not running with boots on your dog, certainly doing your due diligence. And this is something I talk about, whether, I'm talking to people who hunt with their dogs or do dog sports, and agility and flyball and all that, or run with their dogs. Doing that after activity quick dog check is so very important. So making sure that like when you get back from a run, I know you're going to want to get out of all your gear and get your, recovery drink and all of that. I mean, it doesn't take long, maybe 2 minutes, and just doing a scan of your dog's paws. If they were swimming or if you were running, if they were running off leash on trails, checking their underbelly, also checking in their ears,
Yeah.
especially as we get in the warmer months. If you're out in the woods and ticks and things like that, they love to just kind of burrow in and behind their ears. So, checking those quick places for any kind of cut, scrapes, abrasions, all of that is going to be so important. And especially, if you're out running in snow and ice, making sure there's nothing like frozen and stuck in between their pads.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And maybe something I don't necessarily think about when I have Kenzie out, but definitely something great to consider and to make time for because they are our best friends and we
That's
want them
right.
around. We spoke about, or you spoke about like the overheating in our dogs and kind of like what that looks like in terms of their tongue and the different sorts of like variations of what their tongue can do. How do we recognize signs of just general like fatigue or discomfort?
Yeah. So beyond kind of the obvious of them limping, right?
Yeah.
Which usually like I'm like, oh, well, if they're limping, something really hurts. Cause usually they're, so good at hiding their pain, which as a dog owner and also the veterinarian can sometimes be really frustrating where you're like, just tell me where it hurts and when it hurts. And so some things to think about, certainly as they are, if they're kind of lagging behind, right? So normally, Finn is usually about a half a pace in front of me. And they'll, sometimes if he's like a half a pace behind, I'm like, what's going on? And Sometimes it's just he's dinking around and he's smelling things and he wants to stop. But there are other times where I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Like this is the third run that we've had in the last 4 days. You know what? I'm going to cut this loop short and we're going to head home. Lagging behind is certainly one. If they're off leash, and something to think about is if when they are not as responsive as they usually are. You shake that bag of treats and they just kind of look at you and give you this like kind of nonchalant stare. That's usually a sign of like, hey, I'm tired or something doesn't feel good. I'm not myself per se. And so, that lagging behind, kind of lack of responsiveness. Excessive panting can also be something to think about. Like, sure, if they've been playing chase, playing fetch for the last 15, 20 minutes, okay. But if it's something that they don't normally do, that, hey, we're 15, 20 minutes into just an easy run and they're panting way more than they usually do, that can be a sign of either they're nervous, scared, or in pain or uncomfortable. And so those are all signs to be like, all right, we're shutting it down, let's go back inside, let's figure out what is making you have this behavior. And if you can't, certainly getting on the phone with your veterinarian is going to be your best bet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good information. I think sometimes we just want to keep going or not take the time, but it's so important to really like lean into anything that just is off with our dogs for sure. Now, you mentioned before that a 7-minute mile pace for a human is like a 11-minute mile pace for our dogs, which is so wild. Is it okay to run strides or to run like fast workouts on the road with our dogs? Or should that just be a day that maybe is their recovery day or their rest day?
Yeah, and I think that really depends. It's going to depend on your dog and like where they are in their endurance buildup, where they are kind of in their enjoyment of that experience. Like when I'm doing track workouts, I don't bring Finn. Like he's there for the warm up and the cool down miles on the
Cute.
road, but he's not running circles with me. Not more so, not because I don't think he can. I just would be concerned that I might like fall over on top of him, right?
Yeah.
And usually I'm dying when we're running circles on the track. So I think, but then like if I have a tempo run or I've got, some 1K repeats or things like that, like he will tag along and but again, he's been an endurance guy with me since we've had him when we adopted him when he was 2.5, and he's
Yeah.
a hard charger. So there may be other dogs that really that's not their jam. Like they really prefer their quote unquote dog 11-minute miles. And that's where, that's their sweet spot. So I think it's most important to pay it, like give it a try, maybe on a shorter workout and see, does your dog enjoy it? Do you enjoy it? Because sometimes it's like, if you're really trying to focus on hitting paces and times, and you're getting frustrated because your dog wants to stop and sniff something, or maybe has to go to the bathroom or whatever, and then maybe from your personal standpoint, it's not a good thing to bring your dog on those runs and really just have them, be where you don't care about your pace or your recovery pace and things like that. And that's better for you and better for your dog and your relationship to have a company on those runs instead of your speed workouts.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets to be a win for both dog and human. I know
Yeah.
Kenzie, I don't think Kenzie would go on workouts with me. He loves to sprint, but usually it's after a ball.
Yeah. There are times when I've brought Finn along where I'm
Yeah.
like dying on a 1K and I'm like, don't you want to stop and pee or don't you want to stop and sniff something so
Yeah.
I can rest during
Yeah.
this interval? But for some reason, he never wants to do that when I am, I'm dying with my heart pounding out of my chest, but that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah. I'm curious to know how many miles a week is Finn running right now?
Yeah, well, we're kind of in just kind of a steady state right now of maintaining miles. So we went for 8 this morning. So it varies. I travel for work a lot too. So
Yeah.
his mileage will ebb and flow, but like when I trained for New York last year, I mean he came on our 20 and 22s.
So great.
And yeah, I know. The annoying thing is he then wants to play fetch when we get home. And I'm like, dude, I just need to lay on the sofa and like watch TV. Why do you have so much more energy? But
It's because your
that's,
7-minute miles are 11 to him.
I know, I know.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. And I think that's actually a really interesting. It's like such a great testament to your yellow lab who is 10, who's running 20 to 22-mile long runs with you. And I have a black lab who is a year younger and she's not doing that. She's not even running a mile. Like she will chase a ball and run miles doing that. But being next to me on leash, specifically on leash, is not her jam. So I
Yeah,
think it's just so it's actually really cool to kind of see the differences in the same breed, but it's just different interests for that dog.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like so you mentioned after a run, checking their paws, their stomach, behind and inside their ears, maybe giving them a little bit of a snack because they also need that recovery just like we do as humans. Are there any other like best like post run tips that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I certainly, I mean, they need hydration just like we
Yeah.
do. So one of the kind of tricks that I will do, especially in the warmer months after a run, is for Finn, I'll take, about a quarter cup of kibble for him and actually do what we call floating his food. So I'll take it and actually put it in a bowl of water, almost like as much as when you eat cereal and like you've got the milk left and there's still a few like Lucky Charms is my weakness. So there's still a few Lucky Charms floating around on the top of the milk. That's about the ratio of kind of kibble to water. And so he will eat that kibble readily, but then I'm also getting some hydration back into him. So I think that is, again, just like it is for us, super important for them afterwards when we're getting some good protein and fat into their system, but then they're also getting that hydration as well.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. And yeah, just making sure your dog is happy, healthy, fueled, just like we want to be as humans. I think that's awesome. Now, we talked a lot about different things to do on a run with our dog. Is there anything specific, and this can include activity too, but is there anything specific around like a common mistake that we make when we take our dog out for a run? Anything that's kind of glaring that we haven't talked about yet?
Ooh, I would say probably the one piece. So depending on the schedule of how you feed your dog, something that a lot of times people don't think about is we don't want to feed them right before a run. So, like I said, we do a lot of early morning running together. Finn will get a small, like he gets about a quarter of his normal portion because otherwise he gets hangry. I mean, he's a Labrador. We
Yeah.
talked about how much they love food. So I'm going to give him like enough to kind of satisfy that itch that he's got for some kibble first thing in the morning, but I'm not going to give him his full portion before we go to run. I think, some people get very much into a routine of like, oh, well, he eats twice a day. I'm going to feed him breakfast and then we're going to go for a run. Even an hour later, that's still sitting in their bellies. And so it's really not setting them up for success for the best absorption of their nutrients. And it may actually be putting them at risk for developing something called bloat. So that's where their stomach gets so full of kibble and air that it will actually can twist. And that it can be really serious from a health condition. It can also sometimes cause them to die. Those are things, especially when we think about like our deeper chested dogs. So that can be everything from a golden retriever to a German short hair pointer, Vizsla, those guys, border collies who have that deeper chest. If we feed them, a big portion of food and then ask them to go run around and jump around and things like that, it could be, again, putting them at risk for that, as well as they just don't absorb their nutrients as well. So it's almost like you're wasting your money on their food and you're doing a disservice to what their body really needs. So, we will, for Finn, he'll get that little snack. When we get back in the morning, he will get the rest of his breakfast. And so then it kind of checks two boxes where we're feeding his recovery needs. We're also giving him the rest of his fuel for the day. The other kind of hack that you could do is, and we do this when we're training for marathons, and he's going to go 22 with me. The night before, he gets a big portion of his next day meal. So it's kind of like, if you think about us, if you're going to go on a road trip and you need to leave at 3 o'clock in the morning to set out, you're going to go and you're going to fill up your gas tank the night before, so that when you wake up, you can pour your coffee in your travel mug and you can hit the road. Kind of the same concept for our dogs, where let's fill his gas tank up. He can do all the digesting of those great nutrients while he sleeps overnight. And then that morning, he can literally hit the ground running with us and know that he has all the nutrients he needs.
I love that. It's kind of like that dinner before the long run. We love to have
That's
just a
right.
little bit more, right? And it fuels us for that run. I love that so much. And do you see any worry with feeding your dog and then taking them out for a walk right after? Like, is that considered safe, or is that still kind of some gray territory?
Yeah, no, that's pretty safe as far as, they are typically, if they're on a walk, they're just kind of plodding along with us, and not doing all kinds of crazy twists and turns and jumps and super high activity. So
Yeah.
that is a totally safe thing to do.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good. I'm curious to know, like, with running comes injury, right? Unfortunately, it's like one of the toughest pieces to this sport. Our dogs will get injured just like we do. What are kind of maybe the top two common injuries you see in our dogs, and what does kind of that rehab process look like? If you wanted to share more on that.
Yeah, so not usually running related unless they're off leash, but certainly can happen while doing high activity. And usually the two biggest risks to our dogs are the tennis ball and the squirrel, is tearing, so they can tear their ACL. In dogs, we call it their
Oh,
cruciate, their CCL. In humans, it's our ACL, but it's the same thing. The ligament that holds their knee in the position that it should be in to function normally. But that's probably the most common athletic injury that we see in our dogs. And when it gets torn, typically surgery is going to be the best bet for them to get back to full function, or as close to full function as they can. We used to, and this is one of the reasons why I got very interested in canine rehab and acupuncture, was we used to, as a profession, would recommend, all right, you tear your cruciate, you have knee surgery, let's crate rest them. So activity restrict them for 8 weeks and then just let them go. Well, more times than not, when we did that, they would tear their other cruciate in their knee, because that other leg has been working so hard and the repaired leg has been doing nothing. And so when we just let them go again, they don't, we kind of have a joke that dogs are three legs built with a spare. And so they can get around super well on three legs. But when there's that acute adjustment to having to do that, that puts such stress on that other back leg that they would tear it. So now we know better. And so now it's a similar process. I tore my ACL 10 years ago skiing,
oh,
and it's the same. I was like, oh, this is very similar to what we do in the dogs now, from a rehab perspective. And, it's a lot of range of motion. It's a lot of rebuilding of trust that that leg is now stable and secure and can bear weight. And it's not a lot of times people associate, okay, if I'm going to do rehab on my dog, I need an underwater treadmill. And
yeah.
you don't. Like, that is like a maybe 2 to 3% of the whole package of how we actually rehab a dog. A lot of it is, strength building exercises, balance, keeping that range of motion where it needs to be, and things like that to get them functioning again. So it's a long, it's a probably anywhere, between an 8 to 12 week process to get these guys rehabbed after a knee injury like that. But But we've seen that with rehab, that they actually, it decreases their risk for rupturing their other ones. So, and gets them back to doing the things that they love.
Yeah, which is what we definitely want. We want to see them happy and moving again. And how does acupuncture kind of fall into our dog's space? And like what are the benefits of it? How and why do you use it? And can you just talk more about that?
Yeah, yeah. So acupuncture can fit into their space just like it does into ours. So it's kind of crazy the overlap of points, acupuncture points on humans and dogs. They're like probably 98% similar. And our dogs are applauding that if you can hear them in the background. But yeah, so I will do acupuncture anywhere from, in our senior dogs to really, it's a great way. Sometimes there are, complicating factors if they have liver disease or kidney disease or things like that, where maybe medicine isn't going to be able to treat them as well as it could. It also can complement, regular Western side of medicine as well. But so for mobility, I also use it sometimes in dogs who have anxiety issues. There are a lot of calming points that we can really tap into. I'm treating a dog right now who has inflammatory bowel disease. So similar to like IBS in people, dogs can get that. And with acupuncture, we were able to actually reduce the level of steroids that the dog was on and get better function of her GI tract. And so there's tons of uses for it. I think one of the cool things, and this goes back to being food motivated, what I'll do a lot of times and what a lot of acupuncture therapists will do is we use frozen baby food as something for the dogs to concentrate on while we put the needles in. And then they will just hang out with us, for 20 minutes or so. And they have their little snack going on in their love language and they get treated as well.
Life is good.
Yeah.
My gosh, this was such a great hour and amazing conversation. And I know I learned a few things. I hope our audience also learned a few things or maybe took a step back and thought, oh, I should think more about this or be more intentional with it. Is there anything that you want to cover that we didn't get to cover today?
I guess one last thing, because this kind of falls both into just pets in general, but then certainly our running buddies, because I know myself, I take supplements and I know based on, research, the pet supplement industry is like a $2.2 billion industry. So a lot of pet owners out there are giving supplements to their pets. And so I like my one thing that I talk to people about is because it is such a big industry, there are a lot of companies that might be jumping on the bandwagon because they know people will buy it for their pets. So to make sure you do your due diligence and certainly, for our athletic dogs, things like glucosamine, chondroitin, omega-3 fatty acids, that fish oil, also, excuse me, also things like CBD are all great ways to help with inflammation and joint health in our dogs. But making sure you do your due diligence on researching the manufacturer of that supplement is going to be so important. Not only to make sure you're spending your money wisely, but then also making sure that that supplement is pure and doesn't contain any toxins that might make your dog sick.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite manufacturers by chance?
Yeah. Selfishly, I mean, I work for the company, so
Right.
certainly any of the supplements by Purina. I mean, we do 100,000 quality and safety checks in a 24-hour period, so we are making sure that it is, spot on. But also, like Nutramax is a great organization. They make joint supplements, as well as there's a company called Vet CS, and they're actually out of Colorado, just out of Centennial here. But they make great CBD supplements, both for humans as well as pets and horses. But Vet CS is another one that, again, does great quality control. That's what I use for Finn, and I used on my older dogs as well. So those are probably my top three that are out there.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you for that info and for this awesome hour of conversation. I really appreciate you and having the time to do this today. For our audience listening, if they want to follow you on social media or just learn more about you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at PetVetRuthAnn.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Ruth Ann. You're amazing. I really appreciate you. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone. We'll see you again next